And a very warm welcome to everybody. I was delighted to see that we have got a good mixture this afternoon of long-standing and more recent members of the Trust, and it's just terrific that we have such a broad cross-section of those who are interested in the Trust taking part this afternoon. We are, of course, holding this meeting online for a very good reason rather than actually in person, but I know we'd all very much prefer to be doing. And that is, of course, because of the extremely difficult 18 months or so that we've had from COVID. As you can all imagine, it's been an extraordinarily difficult time for the Trust. Huge pressures on everybody, a huge amount of hard work and extremely difficult circumstances. However, it's probably a uniquely black cloud that doesn't have at least some redeeming features, and I think there are a couple of things that have come out positively over the course of the last 18 months. One is just how extraordinarily well the Trust has adapted to change. Throughout COVID, we've seen a rate of innovation, which is, I think, quite unprecedented in the whole history of the Trust. There's been some fantastic learning from that. The other factor, of course, is that out of that difficulty has become a huge amount of pride. If you look at how the Trust has performed over the course of COVID, it has done almost uniquely well amongst large trusts in England. In terms of the control of infection within the Trust and in a variety of other ways, and in terms of the help that we've given to other organisations. So there's a massive amount to be proud of in terms of what's happened during an otherwise extremely difficult period. So this afternoon we're going to hear a little bit more about that. David French is going to start by telling us a little bit about some of the challenges that we've had and how we've reacted to them. We're then going to hear from Ian Howard, who is our interim Chief Financial Officer, about how the money's working, then from Bob Purkis, our lead governor, and finally we're going to hear from Joe Teague about some of the, as it were, the legacy problems that COVID has left us with. So really encourage you to ask questions. This is your meeting, not the Trust meeting. And you know, there's no question you shouldn't feel fully entitled to ask. So at that point, I'd like to hand over to our first speaker, David French, the Chief Executive. If I recall correctly, at this time, our meeting last year, David was in the role of interim Chief Executive following the departure of Paula Head. But I was absolutely delighted in the spring of this year when we were able to confirm David permanently in the role, and what a terrific job he's done since the spring. So over to you, David, to tell us a little bit about what the last few months has felt like.
That's super. Thank you, Peter, and good afternoon, everyone. And I'd like to extend my welcome to you today for our annual members meeting, and thank you all for coming. So I'm not going to be talking for too long, but what I wanted to share with you is a bit about who we are and give you an idea about who we are as an organisation. Some details about the last 18 months, really, the period so dominated by COVID, where we are now, and the challenges that we're facing, and then close with our thoughts on where we're heading to as an organisation over the next 5 years or so. Thank you, Sam. So something of a landmark for us in 2021, in that we exceeded a turnover of £1 billion. I think we're something like the 8th largest trust in the country, and we're now more than 13,000 employees. So a huge scale, and we're both a hospital serving our very local population in the city of Southampton and the surrounding Hampshire region, providing all the services you'd expect from a district general hospital. But also we're a specialist tertiary referral hospital for much of central southern England and in fact Jersey and Guernsey, and we're serving nearly 4 million people who are referred here generally after being referred from GP to their local hospital and then being referred on to Southampton for those really specialist services that we provide. We're a major trauma centre, and that came into focus for us on Sunday night with the train crash, because the train driver who was injured in that crash was driven past Salisbury Hospital to come to the major trauma centre here in Southampton. There are only 13, I think, in the country, and we're one of only 2 in the south that is the major trauma centre for both children and adults. And then not to forget, we're a university teaching hospital, and our links into R&D are really important for us. We're one of the highest recruiting trusts in the country on clinical trials, and that's really important to us because there's a strong connection between hospitals that are research active and the quality of care and indeed the quality of outcomes that we deliver. So we're really proud that we're so active in the R&D space. Thank you, Sam. Just to put some numbers to the scale that I've described, so 160,000 inpatients and day case patients, 650,000 outpatient appointments, 150,000 cases in ED, and interestingly, since COVID, we're up more than 15% on pre-COVID. So, a year or so ago, we'd been talking in the range of 130,000, but we're now up to 150,000. In some cases, more than 500 a day. And our work is not just here in Southampton. Our staff are delivering outpatient clinics across the south of England in places like Poole and Dorchester and on the Isle of Wight. So really far-flung places across the south. Thank you, Sam. So on the slide there, I won't read them out, but the values for the organisation, we've had those in place certainly since I've been at the organisation 5 years, and we were embedding them then, but they really inform everything that we do. And I think if you bumped into an employee in the corridor in the hospital and asked them to say what are the 3 values of the organisation, they would be able to quote these. So really well established and embedded values across the organisation. Patients first, it's the first one of our values, and it's the heart of everything that we do. Working together, I think when this was originally envisaged, it was about working as a team within the hospital, but increasingly now our work is in partnership and collaboration with agencies and other organisations outside the hospital. So the NHS, social care and local authorities, and the third sector. And then this concept of always improving, it means that we're constantly looking for new ways to be better tomorrow than what we were able to be today. So it's being hungry for improvement, hungry for change, so that the care that we're providing gets better and better. Inevitably, when we think about 2021, our thoughts turn to COVID. And Peter said in his opening comments about the pride that we have in the hospital, and I absolutely share that. I am so proud of what we as an organisation have been able to achieve through what was really a unique and challenging, such a difficult time. But I think however you want to measure, or however you choose to measure success for a hospital, then UHS stands really well. So just a few examples. We took more than 80 intensive care patients from other hospitals in that peak around January, February of this year. So we're a large organisation, and it was our role to step up and support others in the region struggling to cope. But we took patients from Kent, from Surrey, from Sussex, from Hampshire, And then later on, as the Kent wave spread north, we took patients from Hertfordshire up into the West Midlands, and we took several from Birmingham. So I think we feel that as an organisation we did step up and we supported the NHS, and our fantastic people and our resources enabled us to do that. Another thing that we're really proud of are our low rates of nosocomial infection. So nosocomial infection is infection within the hospital. And the way that you measure this is if you look at the number of total number of COVID patients in the hospital, you look at the percentage of those, the proportion who caught COVID within the hospital. And obviously you would want that number to be as low as possible, because we're trying to minimise infection rates, nosocomial infection within the hospital. And again, UHS has done a fantastic job through our COVID Zero campaign. We said at the start, let's aim not to have any transmission of COVID within the hospital, and our performance has been really strong, one of the best in the country. And that's a really important statistic, because particularly with our frail elderly population in the hospitals, the mortality rates of COVID in that group was 30, 40, sometimes 50%. So we knew that nosocomial infection had a direct impact on survival or mortality for that group of patients. We've been, and I'm sure if you've been watching the news, how influential UHS has been in terms of the research and development. Saul Faust has been one of the regular commentators on the BBC News, and indeed led the COVID boost study, which has concluded recently, and has informed the government's policy on the booster. And Saul, I'm proud to say, is a doctor here in Southampton. And although we had really a really difficult time, at one stage we had more than 350 COVID patients in the hospital, we did try and keep particularly urgent services running as much as we can. So nothing more urgent than cancer surgery, and we kept those services running, and indeed our performance as a hospital, again, one of the best in the country. The estate is large, and it's a mix of 1960s, 1970s core with new bits built on, and where it sometimes feels like a building site, but significant investment in the estate. We spent more than 80 million pounds on capital last year, so our biggest ever capital year, and critically that included a new general intensive care unit. And thank goodness we made that decision. In fairness, it was made before COVID, but thank goodness we made that decision when we did, because it was that enabled us to have the intensive care capacity, not just to support local patients from Southampton, but gave us the ability to support other parts of the country, as I've described. And then we also, during COVID, initiated a patient support hub where we identified vulnerable people in the community, and were able to provide them with really close and personal support. And indeed, Emma Squires, who was kind of at the heart of that programme, got a call from His Royal Highness the Duke of Cambridge to congratulate her on that programme. Really successful. Before I move off this slide, I do just need to say a huge thank you to all of our staff, all 14,000 of them, for the courage, resilience, determination, flexibility to keep going through what was a really challenging and difficult time. I'm very proud of all of them and the job that they did, and it's fair to say also that came at some cost, and indeed some of our staff paid the ultimate price and lost their life through COVID. So a huge thank you, and my personal respect can't be overstated enough. Sam, thank you. So in terms of where we are now, I think Joe will give us more detail on the challenges that we're facing, but capacity for us is a key issue, and that's not just in terms of the estate and not having enough building capacity, but also the workforce. So, you know, it's true to say that the Brexit circumstances mean that we've lost staff. Many have returned to their home countries in Europe. We've got increased staff absences through COVID. So what we're trying to do is get through the backlog that we've got in work, but we are facing a bit of a headwind in terms of workforce, particularly our ability to recruit when we've got workforce shortages across the whole, you know, not just the healthcare sector, but across the whole economy. We are focused very much on staff well-being, recognising the difficult 18 months that we've had. So a lot of investment in the hospital in new programs to support staff, and we've taken a far more robust attitude towards patients who are aggressive or abusive to our staff, and that can now culminate in actually us refusing to provide treatment for people that treat our staff in that way. We're clear there's no excuse for it, and we won't, as an organisation, tolerate it. The EDI agenda, so this is around equality, diversity, inclusion. I think we're making good steps on that. Long way still to go, but we are making progress with a lot of focus on that currently. Sam, next slide, please. So in terms of where we are headed to as an organisation, I think, you know, through COVID and as we came out, we agreed as a board that it was important that we set ourselves a vision for 5 years' time, what we wanted the organisation to look like. I think we felt that as we came out of COVID and people's heads started to come up, then it was the right time to look at what we were seeking to achieve by 2025, and that really was the origin of this revision to our strategic plan. It's available on our website, so I'll not go through all of the detail of it, but a few things I'll just draw out. But essentially, we've pulled together quite high level North Star ambitions for the organisation, split down into 5 themes. The first of which, unsurprisingly, is patients. Thank you, Sam. And this is around making sure that we've got plans and strategies in place so that our outcomes keep on improving, the safety of our services keep on improving, and the experience that patients and their families have within this hospital keep on improving. The next one, Sam. We're a university teaching hospital, and as I said in my opening remarks, we see a correlation between the research and innovation in terms of our ability to recruit the best staff, and critically the impact that our research program has on our patient outcomes. So the board agreed about 5 or 6 months ago to significantly increase the level of investment that we're putting into R&D, and indeed we're bidding for national funds so that we can really step up our research and development activity. Thank you, Sam. Strapline for the organisation: world-class people delivering world-class care. So this is around making sure that we're able to recruit enough people. It's around when we have recruited them, that the experience that they get here, no matter who they are, in terms of seniority, junior through senior, their ethnic background, religious background, whatever, whoever they are, their experience here is good. And that's meaning that we create a culture and environment where people feel able to contribute. They feel part of the family, able to give their best and able to deliver the best care that they possibly can to patients. The NHS is increasingly now moving away from self-contained foundation trusts like ours competing with other hospitals for patients and for resources. And the NHS is switching really quite quickly into a more collaborative environment where there isn't just the ability to collaborate, but actually there's an expectation of collaboration. And we're investing in those partnerships, not just to support other hospitals, but frankly, because we need the support of others as well. So we've recruited into new posts to enable that to happen. And certainly I and the senior leadership team are spending far more of our time in cultivating those partnerships to be able to bring those to generate real and lasting improvements to what we do. Thank you, Sam. And the final theme we've called Foundations for the Future, and it's around the corporate infrastructure of the hospital. So what can digital IT infrastructure do? How do we want to manage the finances? But critically in there is the acknowledgement that our estate is in part not fit for purpose to be a world-class university teaching hospital in the 21st century. Some of that is the capacity of the estate. Some of it is around the quality of the estate and the environment in which patients are being cared for and staff are working. That will be a long and expensive journey that we need to go on, but I think we're clear on how we want the hospital to look over the 5 years, so that we're really ready for the rest of the 21st century. And this is probably timely given the conversations that are going on in Glasgow this week, but we absolutely recognise our role as a major anchor employer in the city and our role in delivering a greener NHS. So a really active sustainability agenda. We've challenged ourselves to reduce our direct carbon footprint by 80% over the next 15 years. We have a job of work to do, given that we're in a 1960s and 1970s estate, but that's the focus that we've got and the commitment that we've made. So I'll pause there. Thank you, Sam. I'll pause there, Peter, but I'm happy to take any questions on anything that I've said.
Thanks very much. Thanks very much. Thanks very much indeed, David. We've actually had a couple of questions that have come through to you. One is actually very germane to your last comment. What measures are UHS going to take to reduce our carbon footprint, and is there a target date? So you might want to add to what you've just said very briefly. And the second question was, will UHS allow staff to partake in hybrid working practices? This will free up valuable space for patient care and reduce the carbon footprint by less use of cars on the road. So, David, if you could just perhaps quite briefly give us your thoughts on those two ideas and those two questions.
Yeah. So on the sustainability one, the target I'd said. So what are we doing? We've replaced all of our lighting with LEDs, and whilst that's a quick job in your home, you can't imagine the number of light fittings that we've changed and the cost of that. Just replaced the windows at the printer stand, to really trying to get our energy consumption down. We're about to go into a new renewal of our on-site energy generation. We've got a combined heat and power plant that we'll be replacing. That gives us an opportunity. All of our new buildings are at a completely different level of environmental sustainability than our existing buildings. Our existing buildings, though, are a challenge. We've got PV panels going up. We've got electric car chargers in the car park, and the new car park that we're building at Adenac will have 60 chargers. I think digital can move us forward a lot. So during COVID, the number of outpatient appointments that were done online, I think peaked at something like 60%. We're now down to sort of 20 or 30%, but obviously every outpatient appointment that's done online rather than face to face cuts down on transport on a journey. So there's a balance to be drawn there, because sometimes face to face is just better than virtual, but I think it's a combination of all of those. But let's be clear, we've a lot still to do, and we've a lot of work to do if we're going to get down to 20% of our current footprint in 15 years time. On hybrid working, yes, absolutely. As it happens, I'm working from home today, and my team to do that, and many people across the organisation do that. So we're supportive of that, and IT did a great job in enabling the IT so that people can do that. And going forward, I think it's the way of working. The policy of the hospital has been to say to teams, you can organise yourselves how you want, and so long as the job gets done, because we're here to provide care for patients, so long as the job gets done, you've got flexibility within teams to organise yourselves in the right way. And just as an example, we're short of offices in the exec corridor, and actually we've gone in that instead of everyone has their own office, four execs at the moment are sharing 3 offices by this hot desking concept. And to be honest, given how fast the hospital is growing and our ability or inability to build offices at the same rate, we're going to need to see more and more of that kind of working for it to work.
Good, thanks very much indeed, David. We should probably move on at this point. I mentioned, I made a reference earlier on to David having been interim chief executive and subsequently be appointed to the chief exec role. Of course, he'd previously been our chief financial officer, so but I was absolutely delighted when David started in the interim role originally that we're able to appoint Ian Howard as our interim chief financial officer. But so effectively been in the job for about a year now, done a terrific job, and I say I'm delighted that we've got somebody of your calibre and style to jump into the role. So tell us a little bit about how the money's been looking for the last 12 months.
Thank you, Peter, and just start by saying obviously delighted to be here presenting to my first AGM as interim CFO and stepping into some rather large shoes that David French has vacated to do the chief exec role. Also really proud to be representing UHS and the values that we represent that David outlined earlier, and what we deliver as a trust. I guess I was reflecting on what to talk to you about today in terms of finances, looking back a year, and I guess I came to the conclusion that the NHS is ever changing, but no more so than during a pandemic. I guess we started 2021 financial year pretty much in crisis management mode with COVID, and just to replicate some of what you said and what David said earlier. Just admiration for the courage and dedication of our staff and how quickly we were able to respond and adapt, and we were able to invest in things such as COVID zero campaigns, perso hoods, which is sort of personal protective equipment, and point of care testing in ED, often well in advance of sort of national decisions on those things, and that's really helped our performance in there. So we've had some investments that we made as well. And as part of that, I guess the finances started the year very much in the periphery, as we were focusing very much on managing COVID and managing the crisis and supporting our staff as best we could. However, within that, we had to maintain some control of our underlying costs and make sure that we weren't heading into an underlying financial problem. So first 6 months of the year, effectively, the government retrospectively topped up NHS Trust, so whatever we spent, we got covered. So we brought back to break even. and the second 6 months we moved on to a block contract with additional funding to support COVID, but very much a block to manage within. And I'm delighted to say that we delivered a break-even position within that. So of our income, which is in excess of £1 billion, which David mentioned earlier, we spent all bar £21,000. So we sometimes refer to the financial position as landing a jumbo jet on a postage stamp, and I kind of feel that was the case in achieving a break-even position in 2021. Also wanted to focus on the capital investment that David's mentioned, so 80 million, a record capital spend for the trust. That was very much built on the previous financial successes. So in previous years we've delivered financial surpluses, and we've benefited from previous regimes of something called provider sustainability funding, which was effectively financial reward for delivering financial performance. So we generated significant surpluses and therefore cash, which we have been able to reinvest in the trust. And I think that's a really positive message for our staff and our community, that if we manage our finances well, which we have done, and that's not a finance responsibility, that's an organisational responsibility, it's everyone's responsibility. And if we do that well, we will reinvest in improving the hospital. So David's already mentioned the new general intensive care unit. That was part of a 4-storey extension to the front of the hospital. 2 of those stories will be theatres, and one of them is going to be a sort of MRI capacity. The first level of theatres is now fully complete, and that work started in 2021. We also had development in ED in our emergency department, finished our children's ED scheme. We had COVID-19 additional equipment and significant spends on equipment, IT, backlog maintenance and energy efficiency as well. And we talked about the LED lights project earlier, but there was a number of schemes around that. I guess looking ahead, given we're now more than halfway through the next financial year, we've very much got a position where we're trying to manage emergency demand pressures, recover our elective activity levels and reduce our waiting lists, whilst also focusing on supporting the well-being of our staff. And to do that, we've got to align capacity and demand, and that's the real challenge for us at the moment. And I'm sure Joe will come on to talk about that in a minute. Sorry. And the finances have very much been linked to that. So the more elective and outpatients work that we've been able to recover and get to pre-COVID levels of activity, or as close to as we can, then we've received more funding for that. So we've very much had alignment of sort of operational need and patient care need for reducing our waiting lists and delivering care to our patients has been very much linked to the finances, which is a really helpful link to have. And we've been making sure that, in summary, we've been pushing ahead with as much as we possibly can and supporting as much as we possibly can financially to maximise our activity and our recovery levels. And I guess it's probably never felt more challenging than at the moment, but financially we started the year in a really strong or in a really stable underlying position, given where we ended 2021, and that's probably where we are at the moment. Probably all I wanted to say, so happy to take any questions.
Okay, thanks very much indeed. Yeah, I can't see any questions just at the moment, but I'm sure that people will have them after a little bit of reflection, and perhaps we have a question coming up now.
Peter, whilst we wait for questions, the question for David, I was going to say the finance team, on the first day of COVID, we sorted all of our remote access and have been working either 100% from home or on a hybrid model ever since. So for 18 months we've been probably majority working from home as it stands. So that kind of is a really good example of the sort of hybrid working model and commitment to sustainability as well as part of that. So I thought it was a good example to you.
Absolutely, that's great. So in fact, we don't appear to actually have any questions just at this moment. We probably will later on, I imagine, Ian, but so be ready. But however important money is, it nonetheless it is actually, of course, an enabler at the end of the day. And what we're really here for is to look after our patients. Particularly appropriate then that we've got our next speaker is Serena Garkroger-Woods, who's head of clinical quality assurance, and she's going to focus on the quality report. I do commend the quality report to our membership. It's hugely detailed and has some it's a goldmine of information. I'm sorry about that on the quality of the work we do for our patients. So, Serena, tell us a little bit more.
Thank you, Peter, and thank you for the invitation to come and talk today about the quality report to the people on the call. So I think we can all agree that we shouldn't really be talking about our business at UHS without keeping quality front and centre. It underpins everything that we do ultimately. And although it is something that we monitor very closely through the year, we continually review it, we continually report on it. At the end of the year, we pull together something that we call the quality report, which is a really, really rich document which holds so much information about how we have performed against our quality indicators. We publish it, so it's available for our staff, it's available for the public, and if anybody has not had the opportunity to have a look at it, as Peter said, I would encourage you to go and have a look, because it really holds so much of the information that we worked towards through the year. So next slide, please, Sam. Thank you. So the quality report. So every year, all NHS hospitals in England have to prepare and publish an annual report for the public about the quality of their services. It's called the quality report, but you might also hear it referred to as the quality account. And it's written in accordance with a set of NHS regulations and some national guidance. It's part of the Trust's annual report, which is placed before Parliament every summer. And as I say, it's a really rich source of information about the quality of care at UHS. And publishing it helps us to keep us more accountable to our patients and the public. Because of that very public publication of it, and that in turn helps us to drive improvement in the quality of the services that we provide. The report aligns with the three core dimensions of quality, which are patient experience, which is how patients experience the care they receive, patient safety, which is keeping patients safe from harm, clearly, and clinical effectiveness, which is how successful is the care that we provide. So really key indicators for us. And the report is a combination of mandated sections that we have to provide as part of the regulation, and information that we can choose to include and share if we want to. And as Peter said before, it is a very large document. We do choose to put a lot of information into it, but I think there's a really good reason for that. Our stakeholders will receive a draft of the version of the report for comment before we publish it, and the feedback that we get from them is included in the final version. So it's quite a collaborative report as well, and the stakeholders help us to hold us accountable for that quality. The stakeholders that we share it with include Council of Governors, the Health Oversight and Scrutiny Committee of Southampton City Council, Health Watch Southampton, and our lead commissioners. So as I say, it's very collaborative in terms of pulling the report together. Next slide, please, Sam. It's a big document. There are 3 sections to it. The first section really is just an introduction. The second section talks a lot about the priorities, our quality priorities for improvement, and that's a section I want to just pull out for this conversation today. The quality priorities are really important to us. They help shape our quality strategies, and they're built around our ambitions and our intention as a trust to deliver the care which is well led, which is safe, which is reliable, and which is compassionate. And that's really important to us as a UHS family, that we include that compassionate element in our quality. And we use the quality priorities to generate them to generate them, we consult with a large number of stakeholders. So again, it's a very collaborative experience. And those stakeholders include our Trust Quality Committee, the Trust Board, the Trust Executive Committee, commissioners, patient representatives, which is really important, and we do that through our local health watch group. We consult with our staff and we consult with our Council of Governors, and we align that consultation with feedback from patient surveys and complaints and other indicators like incident reports, so that we're covering a really wide, broad spectrum of indicators that we look at to generate the principles. Then in the report, every year, it starts off with a historical retrospective look back at how we did on the quality indicators that we set the previous year. So in 2020 and 2021 indicators, we decided to structure them slightly differently to how we had done historically. So we used to do not a scattergun approach, but it was lots and lots of different indicators that didn't really form a very cohesive picture. So last year we decided for the first time to align our priorities to a range of factors which were national, regional, local and trust-wide in a much more focused manner to give us a much more cohesive approach that we could then measure ourselves against. And the three priorities that we picked for last year were better use of resources across the patient's journey to improve quality, and that went from admission to discharge. And if you do get a chance to look at the document, you'll see all the indicators and the measures that were in against that priority. The second priority was improving the quality, safety and reducing harm for our patients, and to really push forward the culture in our organisation where staff understand their role in patient safety. So there was a lot in that one about civility and kindness and really building a culture to underpin safety. And then the final priority for last year was always improving inclusion. So being inclusive of talent, of leadership and promoting a really strong voice for all our staff in a very inclusive way. So in the quality report, the first thing that we did then was review how we did against those priorities so that we could explain to our readers, our public and our staff how we did. Obviously, 2020 was an unusual year, and all three of those quality priorities were set before the pandemic started. So when we came to review our achievements, we had to recognise that many of the aims of those priorities had been disrupted by COVID-19, and then that new plans had to be rapidly developed to address the pandemic, and that those new plans at times had superseded the priorities. So this year, our retrospective review reflected how we addressed the three priorities in the context of the primary focus of our organisation last year, which was obviously the response to the COVID-19 pandemic. So despite the fact that the world had changed such a lot, when we came to do the review, we were really encouraged to see that although there had been some changes in the priorities had been really embedded in our core values, and we actually had managed to achieve the majority of them to the standard that we had hoped to when we originally set them, even though we had set them before the pandemic. So again, if you get the opportunity to have a look at the quality report, you'll be able to see how we worked through the challenges of the pandemic against the priorities that we set last year, and just how successful we actually turned out to be despite all the new challenges. So that was really encouraging for us. The report then goes on to set out this year's quality priorities, so the ones that we're now going to be working on until next year. And we went through the usual consultation process that we would always go through, but we felt that we needed to recognise this year that the management of the pandemic will continue to be a factor for the foreseeable future. So we wanted to be really realistic about our ability to release resources to focus on inequality priorities outside of the urgent operational responses to the pandemic, which are going to continue. Particularly things like a backlog of our patients who are waiting for diagnosis and treatment. So that really had a bearing on what we set this year. So we came up with 4 priorities, and these are the priorities that are now front and centre for us to work through in terms of quality this year, and they are, very quick summary, the first one being continuity of care for women at risk of complications in pregnancy, which comes under the core dimension of patient safety and patient experience. And the reason we've chosen that is because nationally this is quite a problem, and we know that statistically women who have continuity of care during their pregnancy are statistically much less likely to lose their baby or lose their baby in the first 24 weeks after birth, and they're much less likely to experience preterm birth as well. So a really clear national priority that we wanted to align ourselves to. The second quality priority for this year is our staff and wellbeing recovery, which sits under the core dimension of well-led. I don't think there's any need for me to explain why this is really important to us at the moment. The staff have been and are still in a very difficult situation, and I think as an organisation we should feel incredibly proud at how quickly this organisation decided to prioritise staff wellbeing right at the beginning of the pandemic. We have a CEO who has led that hearts and minds right from the start, and I know that the staff are really appreciative of that, but it's not over yet, and we're going to continue to have to support our staff in a very difficult situation. Not only are they dealing with difficult things at work, their usual ways of coping are likely to be challenged at home as well, and we just want to try to protect our staff as much as possible. So that's a real priority for us for the coming year. The third priority is managing risk to patients delayed for treatment and restoring elective programmes. So I'm sure you've all seen, if you're not working in the NHS, you'll see in the press all the difficulties about backlog of work and waiting lists, and that was identified very, very early on in the first wave of the pandemic at UHS that this was going to be a problem. And although we put in a lot of work right from the start, we know realistically we're going to need to continue to work on that as a very, very high priority going forward. And then the fourth priority is reducing healthcare associated infection, which doesn't just mean the COVID infections, although that clearly is going to be a huge part of it. But we know that healthcare associated infection are amongst the most significant causes of morbidity and mortality in healthcare settings. And the pandemic has really just brought that even more into focus for us. So that's a very, very quick whip through the qualities priority for this year. The rest of the second part of the quality report deals with statements of assurance from the board, which are again all very, very quality focused. They're mandated inserts and they're designed to provide assurance that the board of directors has reviewed and engaged in cost-cutting initiatives which link strongly to quality improvement. We have to demonstrate this, and quite rightly so, and they include such areas as audit, payment by results, learning from deaths, CQC activity, and again, if you managed to have a look at the report, we were really pleased and encouraged that we were able to report that we performed really well across the board on all of these quality indicators. And that takes us to part 3 of the report, which is the part of the report where we can be a little bit more freelance. So we choose to use this part of the report to provide updates and information about other areas in which quality is embedded at UHS, and we use this for our commitment to sections. It allows us to review progress and celebrate achievements and highlight areas that we want to continue to improve on and show the public how we're going to do that. And that includes areas such as patient experience, patient environment, staff education and training, R&D, technology and digital platforms, and all sorts of other quality indicators. Right at the end of the report, you find statements from relevant clinical commissioning groups, local health watch organisations, and an overview and scrutiny committee, which is their response to the report. So we send them the draft report, they comment on it, and we really rely on their honesty and their constructive feedback in those comments that we can use to build into our quality priorities in our report for the next year to come. Sam, last slide, please. Happy to say that the comments this year were really very positive, and there were not only some very, very nice comments about what we had managed to achieve in terms of the quality of our services, but also some really lovely supportive comments about how well the staff had worked through the pandemic and how much that was appreciated. That's a really fast gallop through what is a very large report, but it underpins an incredibly important part of the UHS service that we look to deliver. And I'm very happy to take any questions on it.
Sorry, I thought I unmuted. Sorry. Thanks very much. That's a very, very quick gallop through a lot of fascinating information. We haven't actually got any questions specifically on the quality report. We have got a couple of other questions on a couple of clinical matters, and given that we're a little bit ahead of time at the moment, it might be a good time to take those. And Gail, are you able to pick up?
Yes, of course.
Okay, fine. So the two questions for Gail were essentially how we have dealt with the situation in which our staff are either unable or unwilling to take the COVID vaccination, those in patient-facing areas. The second question was really around the consequences of loss of staff to Brexit, how we've coped with that, and a sort of subsidiary question about whether there's any flexibilities in employment we're able to do to make sure that we keep our nurse complement up to the level at which we'd like it to be. So, Gail, if you'd sort of fairly briefly like to field those, that'd be great.
Yes, certainly, Chairman. So in terms of our vaccine position, we are currently at 96% of our staff being vaccinated. We did make a decision as a board to move staff who hadn't been doubly vaccinated to redeploy them from frontline areas. So as part of our COVID Zero campaign and to protect both patients and our staff, we took that difficult decision. But whilst doing that, we've tried to really support those staff and protect their current contracts. We're waiting for the outcome of the national consultation on vaccination, and at that juncture we'll review our position there. However, what I'm hearing, it's possible that that is the way that the NHS will go, and obviously we can share the learning with them with other hospitals in terms of how we have managed this. In terms of, it's a really interesting question about losing overseas staff and particularly from critical care and theatre areas. We're still currently recruiting overseas staff and will continue to do so, and ensure that that drive will happen. That we very much welcome staff from overseas, and they bring different skills and diversity. And we're doing campaigning for example, ICU to get staff in. And yes, we're looking at everything we can in order to both recruit and retain staff at UHS, nursing staff. And equally, we are looking at supporting incentives for staff working from agency, just to support us currently, because it is quite challenging with sickness, COVID-related absence, for example. So a very active campaign in terms of recruitment, and the more I can improve our vacancy, the happier I am. So thank you.
Thanks, Gail. Thanks very much. Okay, so we'll now go on to our next speaker. I mean, many of you will be aware that actually the ultimate governing body of the Trust is the Council of Governors. And indeed, of course, a large part of the Council of Governors, there are three types of governors, but the largest part is elected by the membership. So we are going to hear now from Bob Purkis, who's the lead governor, and actually himself somebody who's elected from amongst the membership. So he's going to say a little bit this afternoon about the work of the Council of Governors, and in particular the hard work which is going on at the moment to extend membership. So Bob, over to you.
Thank you very much, Peter, and welcome to everyone. It's very important meeting. Unfortunately, it's going to be my last one because my period of office runs out before next year. So I'm really pleased to sort of retrospectively report on how far we've come. First of all, let me just expand on what Peter has said, because we have at the moment 21 governors, and we have 3 vacancies actually, plus 5 trust members that participate in the governing body. We have people from staff governors, we have appointed governors, and Southampton City has 5 governors. New Forest, Eastleigh and Test Valley, the Isle of Wight, and 3 of us from the rest of England, whatever that means. We also have developed 2 student governors representatives, which is very important, considering that we have the 2 universities in the city, and we have a lot of young people that we need to look at, as well as other age groups. The role of the governors is an expanding one, actually, but it represents basically the views of the members and the public to the trust, and also the other way around. It's whatever the trust comes up with, how we explain that and tell people what is happening. It's about holding the board to account for the things that they're supposed to be doing, and we do that quite effectively through discussions at the board meeting with the NEDs and certainly with Peter. We also appoint the chair and the non-executive directors and approve large financial transactions. It's been a very interesting period of time that I've been here, 5 years or so, particularly under the direction of Peter. We've seen the trust evolve over a particular difficult period of time. We have a great executive team on board at the moment, certainly with David, with Joe and Gail and Ian. It's really gelled together as a really good executive team, and as you were told earlier, the size of the trust, with 13,000 odd people, over £1 billion turnover, and the biggest employer in Southampton, and so therefore a lot of people dependent on that. We are on that journey to becoming a world-class hospital and trust, and there is a 5-year strategic plan, which is a rolling one, actually, if you think that I've been there for the 5 years. But now what we want to do is to develop that membership base that can help us shape the future and be part of the way the UHS movement develops. And it's part of that, getting those ambitions out there, getting those ambitions into the people and into the community that we need to expand. We need membership which represents the whole of the community. It was the membership that we had some 4 or 5 years ago was a bit on the aging side, let's put it that way. And we now have gone into the universities, we've gone into young people, we've gone into other areas of the community to try to help them understanding that the context of an integrated care system means that we're more than just a hospital. We have that opportunity to prevent measures, particularly for young people. And if we can explain to them how to become more healthy, how to look after themselves, that's going to reduce the pressure on the services down the line. And certainly that's happening more than ever, as we've heard already. Keeping members informed is, as I said, is very more important to us than a lot of things. It's more important than ever, particularly, you know, if we look at the onset of the pandemic and the NHS taking centre stage there in the news, and we saw that rise of misinformation, particularly online, particularly around vaccines. And we want our members to be equipped with the right facts from the trusted experts. We have some brilliant people at the trust, so that they can be confident about our advocacy in the community. It's changed, as everyone said, the way that we engage with members of the pandemic. Technology is, you know, we don't have that face-to-face, that one-to-one meeting, but we can reach out as we are today in a different way, and assessing how we can impact on a virtual basis maybe better, because people don't have to leave home, go out in the snow and come to the hospital, and you can record it and watch it in your own time. So some of those excellent presentations that have been done, I think, have added to the two-way communication structure that we have. But we want to become more than that. We don't just want numbers. What we want is people to become active as a member. So let us know, let your elected governors know of your experiences. Although we all have a constituency, that there's not that much activity within the constituents that we are purported to represent. We also, as I said, we've got 3 vacancies, and there's vacancies come up as we all have a 3-year period. So consider running as a governor in next year's election. Consider sitting down and participating and informing the trust as to what the thoughts are of the people that you mix with in the community. So we will have at least, I think, 1 seat in nearly every area up for grabs next year. We also want you to sign on to the events that Sam and others are really good at putting out, to stay informed and stay and learn about some of those important healthcare issues that we've done, particularly amongst pregnancies and about childcare issues. And don't be afraid to ask questions of our experts. That's what they're there for, and they love it. They really love sharing, as I said, preventative measures as well as helpful information. And take part in the focus groups and surveys. That's going to help us to make the service better and to shape the future of the trust. We're all in it. Health is important to everyone. It's just how we participate in that and help it work better. It's on a lot of pressure, but let's absorb some of that. So thank you very much for attending. I'm welcome to answer any questions that I can. If not, I shall pass them on to Gail and others, but I hope you've enjoyed just that presentation. Thank you, Peter.
Thanks very much. Thanks very much, Bob. That was absolutely terrific. Yeah, we've no particular questions for you at the moment, but I'd just like to endorse what Bob has said there. This is not the board's hospital. This is the community's hospital, and as members, you're representatives of the community. So please tell us what you want, and do absolutely support what Bob is saying. Think about standing as a governor. It's absolutely critical to us that we have a strong, robust, and positive Council of Governors. So please think about it. Okay, so thanks once again, Bob. We'll now move on to our final programme speaker. This is Joe Teep, who's our Chief Operating Officer. Been our Chief Operating Officer for about the last, where are we? We're about the last 18 months, I think. You'll have read an awful lot in the press about the pressures on the trust, in particular, the legacy of COVID, as it were, in terms of waiting times. So Joe's going to bring us up to speed on how that looks from the trust point of view and what it is exactly that we're doing about to deal with our waiting lists. Thanks, Joe.
Great, thanks very much, Chairman, and again, thanks very much for the invite to the meeting to come and speak to members about our waiting lists. Sam, if you could move on to the first of the slides, please. And this is the first slide that we've put together, just gives an indication to colleagues around the activity that we've managed over the period during the annual year 2020-21, and you'll see that the top headline there is we had 3,400 COVID-19 cases in the hospital since the start of the pandemic in February 20, and of course it's really completely changed the way that we've run the hospital since that time. So very soon after I arrived, in fact, we've never really been working in a normal time since then, as we've had to continually manage COVID patients as well as those needing our normal care, and of course we've had to completely reorganise the hospital on quite a few occasions over this period. So it has really impacted on the way that the hospital has been run over this period, and the rest of this slide really just shows the activity that was delivered in 2020-21. But if you look at the smaller figures beneath that, you'll see how much activity we've delivered so far in 2021-22, and you'll be able to quickly work out that we're doing significantly more work this year for non-COVID related activity than we were last year, and therefore at the moment we're probably in our most challenged period, because not only are we still dealing with patients sadly with COVID-19, but we're also seeing a huge demand on our services, both from the emergency and urgent care and on planned care for patients that are requiring our care. So at the moment the hospital is really maxed out in terms of, it's full pretty much all the time in terms of occupancy levels. Our emergency attendances are at record levels, and of course I'll come on to talk about our waiting lists for planned care, which are also growing. So for the NHS staff, as other colleagues have mentioned, it is probably our most difficult period we've faced since the start of the pandemic. Sam, could you move on to the next slide, please? The next few slides now just give some indication of that in relation to our waiting lists, and what you'll see on the graph to the left here, the monthly referral volumes, you'll see that during the sort of height of COVID, the numbers of referrals from GP practices particularly hit sort of rock bottom, going from, as you'll see, 8,000-9,000 a month down to just 2,000 in that period, April-May 2020. And the really public behaviour really changed at that time. The country was in lockdown, and people just didn't attend GP practices during that period. But you'll see now that that's significantly increased. We've seen a big boost in July and August, and in fact now we would say now we're back up to pre-pandemic levels in terms of the numbers of people that are being referred to the hospital. And then on the right hand graph, alongside that, during COVID, we also had significant reductions in some of our activity to be able to deal with patients with COVID-19, but also to protect patients coming into the hospital to stop them contracting COVID. And therefore we reduced a lot of our non-urgent activity and didn't see as many patients in the hospital for a period. And the cumulative effect of that now, with increasing referrals, and the activity back now to normal levels, but with us still having to manage an element of COVID in the hospital, and therefore not seeing as many as we did previously, particularly for planned surgeries. We're seeing our waiting lists grow month on month, and at the moment we're up to really sort of record levels. We've got over 44,000 people on our waiting list currently, of which around 10,000 of those people are waiting for a surgical operation within our theatres. So Sam, if you could move on to the next slide, please. And then this just tries to, it's a little bit complicated and busy, this slide, but it tries to show the way the shape of the waiting list has changed over that time. So the colours on the graph, there's the darker blue is March 20, the slightly lighter blue is March 21, and the sort of salmon orange red colour, however your eyes see that, is September 21. Just starting from the left, you'll see first that patients waiting for appointments waited between 0 and 13 weeks has increased significantly over recent times, and that's because we've been dealing with this much bigger surge in referrals through the last few months and back to pre-pandemic levels. So we've now got a very large number of patients waiting for outpatient appointments, and that's probably at one of the highest levels that we've ever seen. And then if you move along sort of the graph and you go to the two graphs on the right hand side, between above 53 and 77 weeks and above 78 weeks, you'll see that prior to the pandemic we had no patients waiting more than 52 weeks for our care, but you'll now see that in the September 21 figures there are in fact a number of patients now waiting over a year for treatment, and in fact we do have about 120 patients currently waiting over 2 years. So there's some very long waiters that we now need to deal with. And what we're finding is that those waiting for longer periods, over 78 weeks, are now patients that either don't want to have their treatment yet because of COVID or other reasons, or fear of contracting COVID, and want to wait till things have calmed down, or other reasons, or they're more complex patients that are much harder to deal with quickly because they require either a specific surgeon or a specific procedure here. So they're more largely the 78 plus group in now are largely patients that are either prefer to wait for their treatment or have a very specific or more complex need that's harder to deal with. The one bit of good news on this slide, if you look at the 53 to 77 chart, you'll see that we are managing to start to deal with patients in that above a year group between March 21 and September 21. You'll see that group is coming down. Sam, could you move on to the next slide, please? This is quite an important slide to us in terms of the way that we've approached dealing with our waiting lists. Right at the start of COVID, we made a commitment as a trust that we would deal with those that were most urgent, that needed our care first. And so our clinical teams within the hospital, led by Mr. Paul Grundy, our medical director, set off a piece of work to clinically prioritise every patient on our waiting list waiting for surgery. And they were prioritised between patients that needed surgery relatively quickly, patients that could wait up to 3 months, and patients that could wait longer than 3 months. And what you'll see that strategy has actually worked, in that the average wait for patients with a higher clinical priority is much lower than patients that have a much lower clinical priority. So although of course it's still very challenging for those patients with a lower clinical need who are waiting much longer, it has worked in terms of our strategy to make sure that we're there for those that need us the most, with the most urgent conditions. And that's what's set out on the left-hand slide. And then if you go to the right-hand slide of this, the right-hand graph of this slide just shows our work at the moment. We're working very hard to get patients waited over 2 years seen as quickly as possible. And this is the graph, the dark blue line of this shows how we've been treating the patients that are waiting over 2 years by the end of December, and how that graph is coming down. And if we sort of continued on our levels that we were achieving in September, we would have got to 0 by the end of December. The last 8 weeks we have cancelled quite a lot of operations, so we're slightly off course at the moment, but still as a trust very determined to try our best to get as many of patients waiting over 2 years by the end of March 2022 treated by then, and that's still very much our aim and target. And then Sam, if you could go on. So I think from all of this, if onto the last slide, Sam, you'll see for colleagues that of course we've got a huge challenge ahead of us in terms of patients now waiting for our care. Our waiting list is at 44,000 at highest levels, and although we're treating patients in order of clinical need, we've still got a problem to deal with. And as David and other colleagues have said, Ian, that bringing on the capacity and staff to do that very quickly is very, very difficult for the whole of the NHS. So for us, we're trying to approach the challenge perhaps in a slightly different way to how we would have done previously. We, of course, the first on the left-hand side, referring to our people here, for our staff, gone through a very difficult period, worked 19 months in very challenging circumstances. And so what we can't do is just ask people to do more and more. Many of our colleagues have actually worked weekends, they've worked overtime, they've changed the way they've worked, they've gone to work in different areas. And so our approach and our commitment to them is not just to keep asking people in our teams to work harder and harder, but maybe to help us with ideas about how we can work differently. And we certainly do have, and one of the standout features I think of Southampton during this period is how many ideas came up from those colleagues that work on the very front line of our services about how we could do things differently. And that includes some of the digital schemes that we've heard of. We've now got over 100,000 patients registered in our personal care record, our My Medical Record app. We're doing a lot more work virtually, as David said, a lot of staff working from home in different ways, working with our community and system providers in working in different ways for patients to receive care in different ways to how they may have done traditionally. And so very much working differently is the aim for the period ahead, not necessarily just slogging people harder over the next period. We also focus very much on those that need us the most. We've done some work for the board on health inequalities, and we're going to do some further work with the university to look at that, looking at our waiting list in terms of the mix of our waiting list in terms of deprivation, ethnicity, age, gender and other protected characteristics, to make sure that we're not disadvantaging anyone within our community, and that we're focusing hard to make sure that, again, those that need to access our care are being treated fairly as we apportion our resources. And also a strong focus on improving communication with our patients. We've got text reminders already back on for patients that are due appointments, but we're also reviewing all of our patients on our waiting lists who are longer waiters, who will receive letters from us about choices for them over the next period if they're likely to be waiting, and if they need a clinical review or a conversation with one of our clinicians, we can organise that too. And we've started that work already. We've started a small pilot in our ENT, ear, nose and throat specialty, but we're going to roll that out across the whole of our patients across the trust, so they'll get communications with us via letter and options for them. And we're also reviewing the higher priority patients in that high priority group that I showed you. Every 8 weeks, those patients will receive a clinical review from one of our clinicians if they're not treated yet, to make sure that they're still okay, and so we keep a close eye on the waiting list. And then, of course, lastly, we're doing a huge focus on improvement work. We've got big programs of improvement in outpatients and in theatres, and also led by our medical director and our new director of strategy, working with colleagues across the Hampshire and Isle of Wight footprint to see if we can find better solutions for patients and offer them more choice across both the independent sector and potentially in other hospitals across Hampshire and Isle of Wight, where waiters may be less in certain specialties. One of the questions, perhaps could I deal, Chairman, just deal quickly with the question that came up for me on the independent sector.
Yeah, please do so, Jeff, that's fine.
Earlier on, and one of the things that we were immensely proud of in Hampshire and Isle of Wight was our partnership with the independent sector. I know the question I think that Ginny had posted was around nationally the poor value for money reported around use of private hospitals, but that really wasn't our experience in Hampshire and the Isle of Wight. We took over in partnership both the facilities at the Spire, Southampton, and also the Royal Southampton elective facilities with Practice Plus group, and also we used the Nuffield Hospital for some medical step down patients. We ran all of our chemotherapy services at the Spire during COVID, and in fact we established a cancer hub where we brought patients from outside of our normal footprint to treat them, to make sure they could get access to early cancer care. And Hampshire and Isle of Wight, I think, was one of the most successful counties in the whole of England in terms of how we used our private sector facilities. So we've still got some improvement at the moment. We're still using a dedicated theatre at the Royal Southampton and doing small amounts of work with the Spire and Nuffield, and we've moved our cardiac surgery, some of our cardiac surgery work back to the Spire, and we'd like to still develop those partnerships and do more work. But I think we're certainly, we would say we're not in the position like other parts of the UK, and that we felt that we used those facilities really well, again led by our clinical teams that managed those services during the height of COVID.
Joe, thanks very much indeed. We have got one other question, which you might not have had the opportunity to read, Joe, so I'll read it to you if I may. You've recently started a series of discussion groups on various issues, which is a good incentive for public communication. I'd like to see a discussion on discharge of the elderly and handicapped who require social care. The Better Care programme up until now has not been particularly successful. Discharge of the elderly needs extra attention within the system. What are the plans for tackling it? And if you could, very complicated situation, Joe, so if you can explain that in as few words as you're able, that would be great.
Of course, yeah, no, certainly. Firstly, Chairman, to acknowledge that
us, along with other parts of the NHS, have of course really struggled with patients that are medically fit in hospital and able to be discharged to other locations, and then they become unfortunately delayed, because sometimes it's not always easy to get those patients to a suitable location for either for themselves or where it's clinically appropriate. We have about 180 patients at the moment in our hospital that fit that category. We do have a lot of work with our colleagues in both the community hospitals, but also at Hampshire County Council and Southampton City Council and the Clinical Commissioning Group for the Isle of Hampshire and the Isle of Wight. And we've got some work programmes around care homes, around looking at interim bed capacity, looking at how we provide care for patients in the first 12 hours of their admission to hospital, which, if you get right, reduces the onward care needs later in their stay. We're doing some work on admission avoidance to try and keep people out of hospital into more suitable locations, and also focusing on sort of home first, i.e. getting people to their preferred destination as quickly as possible. We do have work to do this. I think the social care sector particularly it's been exceptionally challenging for them for the same reasons as it has been for us, with lots of COVID related absence, and also maintaining staff in the social care sector, particularly in more affluent areas, particularly in parts of Hampshire where it's much harder to recruit staff to the care sector. So I think there's an acknowledgement that it's still an issue for us, but very strong working with our partners and some strong action plans that we're working on. There's quite a lot of further investment and activity going on over this winter period ahead of us to try and improve our position. I'd be happy to sort of pick that up outside with any of the members that want to sort of discuss that in a bit more detail, Chairman, because I realise I've probably rushed that answer just in a few moments.
Thanks very much indeed, Joe. I can't see any further questions for Joe, and we are actually just about out of time. So time might me to start to finish with a few thanks. And first of all, I'd like to thank Sam and the team for setting up this afternoon. Setting up something like this does require a good deal of organisation and complexity, so thanks ever so much, Sam. Thanks very much to the speakers who've covered a huge amount of material in very clearly, I think, but in a very short period of time. But most of all, I'd like to thank the membership for attending this afternoon. It's great to have the opportunity to have this sort of exchange with you. I've sort of been reflecting on the afternoon a little bit, and we've talked an awful lot about challenge, and undoubtedly it has been an extremely challenging period. But going a little bit beyond the challenge that we've talked about, I hope that a number of other themes have come across this afternoon. I hope the theme of our focus on patients and patient need has been clear. I very much hope the membership has a sense of the passion that every single member of the team has got about doing the job in hand, and the compassion with which they go about doing it. I also hope you had some feeling this afternoon for the huge sense of both the pride there is in this organisation for everybody who works with it and in it. And finally, and in one sense, most importantly of all, is a sense of belief in the future, and that a confidence that after a very tough time, we are in a position, we've done enough things, we've done enough planning for the future, with a clear strategy to give us a huge sense of belief that we are going to take UHS to probably a better place than it's ever been before. And I do hope that that sense of confidence in the future is come across. I do hope that you've enjoyed this afternoon as well, and I really would encourage you to give us feedback. As I said in a slightly different context, this is your meeting. This is not the trust meeting. There will be a feedback form. and you will have the, and we really would welcome to have as much feedback as we possibly can, and that will help us, amongst other things, to shape not just the work of the trust, but how we organise the meeting next year. Next year, I do very much hope that we'll be able to have the meeting in person rather than staring to screens, of which I'm sure we've all had enough. And I would be absolutely delighted if we get back to doing that. I personally won't be there because I'm coming towards the end of my period as chair, which finishes in March of next year, and I don't want to get overly emotional at this stage, but just to say that it's been extraordinarily rewarding experience to be associated with such a fine group of people. So do let us have your feedback. Do hope you've enjoyed it, and I usually finish by having by saying have a safe journey home, but you're probably there anyway. So I hope you enjoy the rest of your evening. And thanks very much once again for being with us. Bye.